we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so grab that thing to write with and thing to write on. I'll use this today just to show you can do anything, even on notebook paper. So I think I've met all of you guys actually, which is really cool. So I'll skip ahead a little bit. If I haven't met you, I'm Danica Thurber. My husband and I together founded Project Grief, and it's an online school for teaching art as a tool for grief recovery. And it's my joy to be able to work with you guys today. I'm really excited. So let me make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat. Oh, your mic isn't working. That's okay. Yeah, chat is totally fine. A lot of people, yeah, Zoom is crazy. So thank you for your grace, Liz. I really appreciate that. So let's go ahead and get on started. So who is this webinar for? Obviously people with lots of grace and patience for me, but also those who've lost a loved one 1 or more years ago. So I'm focusing on people who have kind of closed that gap of that first year, because that first year is a lot of, there's so many things that are pressing concerns. There's paperwork, there's making sure that, you know, your income's stable. All of these things are super important at first, and that's called survival mode. And there's not a ton of room for your heart to be able to grieve, to deal with these things. And so I'm working with people who are ready to move forward on their journey towards hope and healing. And only you can decide when that is. But I'm focusing on people who've gone through grief 1 or more years ago. And for question and answer time, as I learned in last time's webinar, we're gonna have a brief intermission at 40 minutes. And at that time, you can write down your questions or type them into the chat, or you can type them as you go. And I'd be happy to answer questions for as long as we are here. So why use art for grief recovery? It's such a strange niche kind of thing. And can you learn to use art in your grief recovery? And the answer is yes, but we'll get there. When a loss happens, you need a way to express your grief. You see on the illustration on the left, there's this giant ball of chaos. And that's what grief does to us. It's inside. And if we don't deal with it, that grief chaos ball actually expands and it starts to wrap us in its arms. And we live a sort of restricted kind of life. It does get bigger if it's not given attention. And so what art does is it frees us to get that chaos out through the arm and onto the canvas or the piece of paper. And once it's out, we actually have the capacity to look at it, you know, almost as a mirror. You're having it out and you can ask questions of your grief, asking what is true, what is beyond my control, and what's in my power to change, like right here on the canvas. And that translates to our lives. And so I just want to encourage you guys, we talked about the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. Often many people have a fixed mindset when it comes to grief. They think, I can't do art. I can't even draw a stick figure. I'll just mess it up. So many people have this. But a growth mindset for art is, I don't have much experience with art in my adult years. Isn't that true for many of us? But I'll give it a try and see what I can learn. So that's the approach we can use today. And my promise to you is that I'll do my part in making it easy for you as well. So our activity, we're just going to jump right in, is called changing our mindset. So if you grab a piece of paper, I'm going to draw with you. We're going to draw 2 silhouettes. So this is a head. Notice I didn't complete the circle. And then shoulders going down. So these represent 2 people, one in a fixed mindset and one in a growth mindset. So go ahead and draw that on your paper. Once you've drawn it, you can label them: grief victim and grief artist. And we'll explore what those terms mean if you missed it last time. Grief victim, grief artist. So go ahead and write those down on your paper. And you can take notes on each side. So what is a grief victim? Kind of go around, you know, take notes around here. What is a grief artist? You can take notes in that empty space. Save the people, because we're going to fill those in a little bit today. So we're not going to use the chat at this moment because I want to save some time. But the grief mindset, is reflected in these statements. The grief victim says, it's too hard to even think about facing my grief right now. How many of us have felt that? I know I have. It's just too hard. So I'm just going to stuff it down, keep it in there. And so that's what we call a static or fixed mindset. If you were here last time, we learned a little bit more about that. And that's represented by a lock. It's the thing that keeps you encompassed in yourself, keeps you from growing. It's a lock on your heart. And for me, I represent a grief fixed mindset by calling it a grief victim. And so if you see here on the right, there's a palette. So if you were painting the picture of your life, the colors you're using as a grief victim are all tones of gray, or they're limited tones, maybe only orange or blue. The grief victim works out of a very limited palette, and that's kind of limits the way that we live. It's a very half-life kind of approach. And a grief victim is someone who lets grief continually happen to them. We talked about this on Saturday as well. We all start there. Loss happens to us, but when we don't deal with it, we develop a victim mentality. And so a grief victim, their identity is tied up in their loss. They have trouble seeing the good around them and feel like bad is all there'll ever be. They allow themselves to experience only those few colors, those emotions on their palette, and they stay stuck where they are and are paralyzed by how far they have to go. And inside the grief victim here, what we're going to do is begin to identify some of the fixed mindsets that we have, the grief victim mindsets. And I'll give some examples in a second here, but maybe you can start to think of what kind of fixed mindsets do you have when it comes to grief or art or life. And oftentimes they're cued by, a judgment of yourself or others, like, I am so weak, I'm so emotional right now. Or it's an I can't reach out for help. I can't, walk into their room because that's too overwhelming for me. Or it's a should, there's a lot of shoulds. I should be over this by now. I know I've felt that one. That's a fixed mindset. Let's look at a couple of examples. And right now, see what resonates with you. And that's what you're going to write inside of your silhouette down here. So here's a few examples. Hopefully you can get prompted by. I should be done feeling like this by now. If I start crying now, I'll never stop. No one wants to hear about my loss or emotional pain. I don't want to be the downer. It's even hard to read these, it's so harsh. So if you see one that resonates with you, just write it in there. If I let myself grieve, I'll have nothing left to hold on to that reminds me of them. It's a tough one. I'm never going to feel happy anymore now that they're gone. I should, there's that again, be stronger than this. My friends and family will never understand my need to grieve for them. Now that they're gone, I see very little value in my future. All my plans have changed and there's nothing to look forward to. There's some tough stuff in there. If you find one that resonates with you, go ahead and write it down. If it prompts something though, in your mind that you're really dealing with, definitely write that down. So I'll give a minute here to work on that. You are so brave right now to do this. So if you haven't quite finished up, that's totally fine. We'll just keep going and then you'll have opportunity to fill in. So I want to give space to share. If you feel like you can write down your statement in the chat, I'd love to see what you're processing right now. Don't feel don't feel obligated though. Anyone has one, they can type it in. So we'll go ahead and move forward here. Okay. So where to grow from here? I like saying that because it's all about that growth mindset, isn't it? Where are we growing from here? We first start with showing ourselves compassion. And that's different than self-pity. Self-pity is something that the grief victim knows very well how to do. They acknowledge where they're at, and then they leave themselves there because they feel weak, like they can't do anything about it. But self-compassion is different. It gives yourself permission to be where you're at, and it lovingly leads yourself forward and out. Like you have so much compassion for yourself, you're not willing to let yourself stay there. And so we begin with that. When you write down your grief victim statement, look at that person and tell her it's okay, but I'm not going to leave you there. So is there hope for change? Is there hope for this person? I really do believe there is. Otherwise, I would not be doing Project Grief or this webinar or trying so hard to grant hope to people. There is hope for change. We talked about this a little bit on Saturday. This idea of neuroplasticity. There's so much research out there that tells us that the brain can change and grow even past our child development phase. And the role of nurture means that even if we did not receive instruction as kids in a growth mindset, we can actually reparent our brains as adults. It's so hopeful. And I think a really great growth mindset to embrace is this statement: I have control over my mindset. So we don't have control over our circumstances very much. Oftentimes we don't have control over our thoughts, but our mindset is a way of thinking. And this statement tells us, I can decide which thoughts I listen to. I can. That's a very key statement. I can choose. Another key statement. New thoughts, new ways of thinking. These are all parts of growth mindset. I have control over my mindset. Nothing else, just my mindset. And so when you look at that grief victim, what you can do is begin to call her a grief artist in disguise. Isn't that an amazing way to flip it? I'm not a grief victim. I'm a grief artist in disguise. Or I'm a growing grief artist. If you're somewhere in the middle, I'm a growing one. That's a big mindset change. And so let's look at that second statement, statement B, the growth mindset. I don't have to face my grief all at once. I can tackle this one step at a time, a little bit every day. You see how that's different from statement A? It's too hard to even think about, going there. This one understands I don't have to do it all at once. I can do it step by step. And that allows some opening, some room for growth. And so that mindset, the growth mindset, I call it a grief artist mindset. And look at that palette, how different it is. There's so many colors, and there's all of them. I mean, there is black, there is gray in that palette, but that's not all there is. There's red and yellow and blue and green, all of these things. And to me, a full color mindset is what life is all about. When you limit yourself, you're not allowing a full life being lived, but all the colors make up a full life. And so the grief artist does acknowledge their pain. And they use and transform that pain into tools and lessons that help them actually grow. They continually discover a new identity, and they're learning to love deeper and be more present as a result of their loss. They've seen how brief life is, how it must be treasured, not to hold on to with white fists like this, but to love deeper and to be more present while you have it. Grief artists acquire healthy coping skills to better work through difficulties as they come. Loss is not the only difficulty you'll face in your life. There's so much more. So what you learn here will apply to many other things in areas of your life. And grief artists are able to see the pain of others and offer the presence and support. A grief victim is so inside, they're not able to see the needs of others. A grief artist begins to, after healing, to look out and see the needs of others and to help. And I see that in many of you that I actually know right here. And know what, too, the grief artist, becoming a grief artist is a long-term journey. And so we don't do this all in one day. We don't do this all in 1 year. but we'll take a small step forward today. That's all we can ask of ourselves. So let's practice transforming this grief victim mindset into a grief artist mindset. What we're going to do in our activity to continue it is you have one statement in here. What we're going to do is find the grief artist statement to counter that. And so I'm going to walk you through examples first in order to do it. So this is a grief victim mentality. You see that lock there. I should be done feeling like this by now. I know that was a big, big one for me. That really kept me blocked in my grief and from expressing it. And so what we do is look at that statement and begin to notice the assumptions behind it. So I'll go ahead and show you. I see in this statement, some of the assumptions are there is a proper should, that's what we're assuming. I should be done. So we say, that's what we're assuming, that there is a timeline, that I should be doing this. And my assumption is I'm not following it. And what that produces, those two assumptions, is a life that lives by this rule. There's something wrong with me, but I'm not sure what it is or how to fix it. Do you see how limiting that is? That is that lock. There's something wrong and I don't know what it is. I can't fix it. So therefore I cannot, fill in the blank. I cannot grieve. I cannot live a full life anymore. I cannot find happiness again. This is the lock that keeps you. And so what we're going to do is find the truth now. We flip it upside down. Let's see what we can see. From these assumptions, we're turning them on their head. And so the growth mindset statement that I came up with for this is, there's no timeline for something like this. There's nothing wrong with me. So that begins with truth. I grant myself permission to experience the full spectrum of emotions. So you see that I should be done feeling like this. The full spectrum of emotions includes this, whatever this is that you're, feeling down about. It includes that, but it includes other things too, all the other colors of life. I grant myself permission. That's a growth mentality. You can work with that. So let's do another one. If I let myself grieve, I'll have nothing left to hold on to that reminds me of them. I know I've felt that. I'm like faithful to their memory by being miserable. So let's notice the assumptions. So what I see in that assumption is a fear of grief, Where will it end if I start? What will I feel? To what depths will I have to go to? That's a fear of grief. I see a fear of forgetting too. I don't want to forget. I'm going to hold on. That's beautiful. You love that person. You don't want to let go. A fear of forgetting. But that fear of forgetting is in the grief victim mentality. It's being captured by yourself. It's not being used properly. So I think another assumption is my loved one's memory is stored in the place of my pain. Ow. Is that true? I really don't think that is. My loved one's memory is stored in my pain. So when we add that together, the rule we're living by is the best way to honor their memory is by staying miserable. Yeah, not true. I see that shaking head, Liz. I feel it. I feel almost tears like thinking of this. Like I've lived here and I know so many people living here because they're trying to be faithful to their loved one's memory. And that's not a life. So let's flip that upside down. My loved one does not live in my grief. They live in my heart. So notice, even though my heart is hurting, I can honor their memory by working through my grief, making something of the life they left for me. Or if they were, maybe they were a child, making something of the life that I have left. You see how freeing that is? That's a life I can live. Even though my heart is hurting, I can honor their memory by working through grief. Wow. So let's work on changing our mindsets. That other side, what's the counter to your grief victim mentality? Let's take a minute or two to see if we can find it. And if you can't, we're going to kind of workshop this in the question and answer time. So no worries, we can ask for help too. But see what you can come up with. You don't have to use the assumption kind of equation that I did. You can just find the truth and turn it upside down. But that helped me. So let's take a couple minutes to think through. Take one more minute and just do what you can. If you feel stuck, that's okay. This is hard. All right, we'll go ahead and move forward. So the next step from here is when we get practical. Because if we have a mindset, but we don't actually put it into practice in our lives, it's just going to stay a thought, like a nice thought, that you'd put on a t-shirt or a journal or a card. We want it to actually move into our lives. And so the way to do that is to put it into practice. So under that growth thought that you have here, write one practical step that is feasible for you to do this week. And then write down a day and time you will do it. I know it sounds really hard. So I'm going to give you some examples. Don't worry. So for this one, I should be done feeling like this by now. What I wrote for the practical step, there's no, right or wrong practical step, as long as it's not self-harm or horrible to you. What I wrote for this is when I notice myself feeling like this, whatever this is today, I will set my phone for 3 minutes, use that timer, and I'll sit down and journal about it just for 3 minutes. So what that will do for me is help me to express what I'm going through now and help me to move through it. And if I can just do it for 3 minutes, it's not as intimidating. So I broke it into a bite-sized chunk. So that's one example of one practical step I can do. So my time and date is today, and time would be when I notice. For this one, if I let myself grieve, I'll have nothing left to hold on to. This step I put in here, it's kind of a self-promotion, but it's intended to be helpful. I will take 1 hour to do the short project in Grief Art 101. So that's my free mini course. And it takes 1 hour to complete all of the information and things. And so I'll schedule that into my calendar to do this week. If it begins to feel like too much for one sitting, I wrote here, I'll break it up into 20-minute chunks. That's more doable, isn't it? And I added something in this one. When I finish, I will reward myself by blank. So maybe you can reward yourself by, doing something you enjoy, like going out for a walk today, or doing something maybe your loved one enjoyed, going to the movies. Oh, you can't do that. Watching the same movie that they loved. So a reward, it adds another dimension to this practicality because it gives you motivation to get through. It is going to be hard. It is going to be tough. But on the other side, there's a reward to look forward to that will help you move through. So this practical step is taking time to actually work through your grief using structure, which is my mini course. Maybe there's a book you can read. There's all kinds of things out there. So if you're looking for structure, this is the mini course that I have. Some of you have taken it already, actually. What it is helping you recognize your grief process, where you're at in it, and start to begin to understand what are the steps that I can take to move forward. It's a very simple kind of a thing. Where am I at? Where am I going? But those two understandings are so pivotal to helping you move through your grief and to take that next step. And I teach it by doing a tiny, tiny art project. And so for you, what is the practical step that you'll take this week? So underneath that growth thought, write one practical step and the time and day that you will do it. So let's take 1 minute there. If you feel stuck, don't worry. We can also workshop it. I'm gonna check the chat here. I see some good stuff happening. Oh, thanks for putting that in there, Liz. So we'll have an opportunity to share as well at the end. Oops. Take the chat. I think it's really hard to think practical when it comes to something abstract like a statement or a mindset. But even though it's hard, we're using grief mindset here or growth mindset, even though it's hard, this is the part that's worth it because this is what makes it all matter. So I want to give space to share. If you're able to type into the chat your growth statement and your grief victim statement as well, if you feel like it, or a practical application step. Whatever you feel like you can share with us, go ahead and type into the chat there. I'll make sure I can see it. Wonderful. See you later, Liz. So it sounds like her practical application is doing a dance or taking a walk later this week. So if you have anything else you'd like to share, go ahead and type it into the chat, but I'll keep moving forward as well. So this week, your next steps are to continue this exercise. See what other grief victim mentalities you can identify. And as soon as you identify them, see what you can identify for a grief artist mentality that counters it. And for each grief artist mentality, always put a practical step. Sometimes it won't come to you right away. So for me, it helps to okay, I'm writing down as much as I can figure out right now, and then walking away and coming back to it. It just kind of plays a little bit in your mind. How much better to ruminate on this than on ruminating on, anxiety or depressive thoughts and all that stuff. Ruminate on this stuff. Oh, awesome. Yeah, Christine says she's going to do journaling for her practical step. That's awesome. I do a ton of journaling. It's super helpful. And so another practical step you could do, for a grief artist mentality is to finish this worksheet. Just write that down. That is your practical step. There's that. So remember that changing a fixed mindset is a long-term journey. We're working towards a growth mindset, and it's the same as a plant. I have my little tomato plants here. They're growing. They do not grow in a day. They take a long time. And some seeds are faster than the others, but we can't expect a growth mindset to just pop up. Grief is a long-term journey, and so is, becoming healthy. And so the transformation I teach is on that long-term journey, having a goal in mind. that's what we're working towards. If you go on a long-term journey and just expect to wander through the desert and, find something on your way, you're not going to last long. You always have a journey, an end goal in mind. It's to get to the other side, whatever the other side means to you. So the Master Your Grief course is a journey that has one goal, is to help you transition from becoming a grief victim, that fixed mindset, to becoming a grief artist, that growth mindset. We do it step by step. And I believe that anyone can become a grief artist. That's the exciting part, is that grief art is all about the process, not the product. Fine art is about the quality of the final product. This is fine art. Grief art is this. It's messy. It's all over the place, and it requires no skill but a willing heart. And so an online course is super important during this time. It's grief support anytime. It's not just when your therapist is available or where you're able to drive. It's low cost and it's germs free. This quarantine time, I really do believe it's an opportunity to deal with the person you're stuck inside with, meaning you. Everything else is silence, these distractions, and guess what starts to pop up? It's the things that's been suppressed during these distractions. And when those grief feelings pop up, when those anxieties or those thoughts, those fixed mindsets pop up, allow yourself structure, allow yourself time and energy to invest in you. And Project Grief, I built so that you would have a way through the journey. So the tagline, I guess, is master your grief so that it doesn't master you. When your grief is mastering you, you're working through a grief victim mentality. When you're mastering your grief, you're working as a grief artist. Such a powerful transition. And so I'm trying my best to offer discounts during this time. It's a really rough time for everyone financially. And so as a small business, what I'm able to offer, actually, it's 25% off. I'll be sending that in the inbox. So go ahead and check that as soon as possible. So I'm super proud of you guys for doing this. This is really hard work, and this is deep work. And so what you've just done is of super value. And I can't wait to see what kind of things come out of it. So you did it. Celebrate. Whatever rewards you need for yourself, go and do that today, please. You're worth it.